What I remember is getting up late at night and coming through there in my pajamas with little footies on them, and Dad, what are you doing? And my dad's nickname for me my whole life, I don't know why, but he called me Big Shot. And I remember saying, "Oh, Big Shot, I'm just sitting here working on something." And he'd be sitting there, by the fireplace writing. And I'd say, "Okay, well, I'm going to bed," and he'd send me off to bed. But those are the earliest memories. I remember very well, going to the dime store in Montevallo and getting the plastic bags with the soldiers, the green plastic soldiers.
Yep.
And I would play with those things. And I can remember, now we would have moved at this point, so I'd be like 8 years old or so. I remember being on the floor in the den playing with those little green plastic soldiers and hearing my mom in the laundry room behind the den typing the manuscript.
Wow.
And there was a table, this little rickety table, and I can close my eyes and still see that manuscript just piling up like this. And, my brother and I would take it and read it because it was double spaced, just typed on an old typewriter. And, we would read it. And, of course, what my father's always said, his reason for wanting to write the book was to create a written record for my brother and me to have some understanding of what he went through in World War II. Because we all had an interest in military history. We had ancestors who fought in the Civil War, and it was always fascinating to us to read their letters that they wrote home. And so he wanted to create something for the family to have some idea of what he had seen and experienced as a Marine. And I think it was, my mom was typing this stuff and she, it's well known. She said, "Gene, this is pretty extraordinary. You ought to get this published."
Yeah.
And of course, if you had known my dad, he was not a self-aggrandizing person at all. I mean, really self-effacing. And he was like, "No, there's no way anybody's going to want to read this," but she persisted. And I remember, a lot of late night conversations. There was a study in our house on the second floor where he spent most of his time. It was on the back side of the house where I grew up. And he would sit in there for hours writing, the manuscript. And of course, they would meet and talk about, well, we need to get contacts. And he started contacting some old officers that he had known to lend their credibility to it. Austin Schaffner being one of them. And I remember a lot of long phone conversations. I remember, man, I can close my eyes and still see this huge manila envelope with the manuscript, and he had sent it to a publisher. And I remember the mail came one day, and I walked up to the mailbox with him, and he said, takes this thing out. He said, "Well, this is probably a rejection." And it was a publisher sending the manuscript back saying, "We're not interested."
Wow. I was going to ask you how many he went through before he got accepted.
Third one.
Wow.
Third one was the charm.
It's got to be a little weird that here you are talking to two relative strangers and you talk about when your parents get married, and I can pick up this book and say, well, your parents got married on March 12th, 1952.
Yeah.
I know from the book, China Marine, for those of you following along at home or listening to the podcast, I'm sure most of you have read With the Old Breed. Pick up China Marine. This is a very good point, period, stop. It wraps everything up. And you and I are talking about this, that when your father sent in the original manuscript, it basically included a lot of the material from China Marine. But as the book saw editors, they said, okay, you're telling us that they had a page quota that they wanted to stick to.
Wait, say that again now.
You were telling me before the show that they said, hey, we want to keep this within so many pages. And
oh, yeah. So when Presidio Press, who I think has been bought by Random House, when they agreed to publish the book, 1980-ish, and I can remember my dad and my mom talking about this, and they were like, well, hey, this thing's too big for the average person, 300, 320 pages, something like that. Let's keep it around that. Let's have you, the beginning, Peleliu, Okinawa, you come home, let's end it right there.
This has been a Digital 410 production.